Hello and welcome to Tokyo Inklings. My name is CY and you can find me on my website at tokyostationpens.com, on Instagram at tokyostationpens, and on Twitter at tokyostationmnh.
And my name is Jacob, and I'm a Futufan on Instagram and on Twitter, and have a blog at futufan.com.
Hi guys, this is Alesa. I'm Inky Rocks on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok.
And this is episode 62. We also have a website at tokyoinklings.com. You can find us on Instagram also at Tokyo Inklings. That's where we upload a preview or kind of like a teaser for our show every 2 weeks. And that's where you can interact with us, give a comment on the picture or directly onto the show notes. Today we've got an exciting episode, I think. First of all, congrats to you two. You put out a really great resource, I think, for the overseas buyer. And we're going to talk more in depth about that. Before we get into that, there was the Ink event, which I believe you both attended. I did not go, so I'm wondering, how was that?
Alesa, do you want to start?
Sure, it was super fun. But it was very for people to understand. Ink is very different than a normal pen ink show that we have here. A normal ink show, you run around, it's very crowded, and people just go to different booths and look at the ink, decide if they want to get it and get it. And lots of times there's like washi tape and all kinds of other stationary things. But this one is like the ink sommelier or something. They just have all this ink out there and they give you a dip pen because they want a fresh pen, and then you use it and they kind of clean up after you. And people come there to not just buy inks, but just to test a lot of different inks. And
exactly.
So many people bring their own ink books and stuff like that. So it's a totally different, it's still an ink show. They're trying to sell ink, but it's a totally different approach to it.
Yeah, that was exactly my experience as well. So I went there, I think, like Sunday morning. So I had the first slot on Sunday. It wasn't too crowded at first, but then after 10 minutes, it was pretty difficult to move. And the reason for that is that, first of all, the whole event space, that hall, is sort of very narrow, right? And then you have like 2, 3, 4 glass tables and full of inks, and then people standing next to the tables, so you don't have much room to move. And then, as you said, Alesa, people aren't really there, at least as far as I could tell, aren't really there to buy. They're there to swatch and to test inks. So they just stand there, like they go to the first ink, and then they carefully swatch and test each and every one, and carefully move from one ink bottle to another, taking their time, right? So if you are in a hurry and you want to go get all the exclusives, you're gonna bump into a lot of people. That was my experience, and that also means that, unlike this Inkunuma show that we talked about before, people weren't really, as far as I can tell, they weren't really rushing to get the event exclusives, right? Because there were a few either like pre-releases at the event, or like event exclusives from Tag, from Itoya, from Kawasaki, and Sailor, and a few others. But people, as far as I could tell, they weren't rushing to get those inks. They were more keen on just carefully, slowly testing each and every ink in order.
For a retailer like Itoya, what do you think the draw of hosting an event like this was? And do you think that was the intention of the hosts, or do you think that's just how it ended up to be?
I don't think they make too much money from the entrance fee, because even though you are paying, I think, 1,000 yen, for those 1,000 yen, you get a custom Itoya branded Pilot Iro Utsushi dip pen. And on top of that, you get a custom-made ink testing notebook made by Kobeha of Graphilo fame. So even if you wouldn't get anything else, just getting that dip pen and that ink testing notebook for 1,000 yen is a pretty good deal, I think. But then on top of that, you get, of course, the event tickets. I can't imagine them making too much money on the entrance fees, and I'm sure they're wasting a lot of ink, and it's going to be a lot of bottles that they have to throw away. So they will only make money if people buy ink. So I'm not sure how profitable this is in the end. I'm curious about that.
Well, you obviously weren't in line paying for ink like the rest of us. I think they did make money. I think, they do sell a lot of ink, but probably, they have to put a lot more effort into it, being that they have to set this whole thing up and have people run it. But, and also many of the inks there were not like $20 bottles of Tono and Limbs inks. They were like $50 bottles of ink and super special editions. Like she said, one of the ones that really surprised me was Aurora inks were relatively popular. And I think it's just seen as an overseas ink and kind of exotic. And those were swatched a lot too. And those tend to be a little bit heftier in price than, say, a Tono and Limbs bottle. But yeah, they definitely didn't make money on the entrance fee. And I'm wondering if it's just part of we're Itoya and we are like the leaders of stationery kind of thing, like a flex of some sort. But,
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, you're right that just like before, I think we talked about that like 2-3 episodes ago, that unlike the Inkunuma show, which is mostly focused on this, regional inks, Itoya's show has a lot of these international inks.
Right.
Including some kind of standard editions like the Atramentis and Robert Oster and whatever, right? But people seem equally keen on swatching and testing those, which I thought was very interesting.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think they might actually just keep the bottles from last year, because quite a few bottles, I'd say probably about 20% of the bottles were, you could swatch the ink, but they didn't have anything to sell you. It was just, you could swatch that ink. So I'm wondering if they just kind of gathered up and cap it, since they are pretty good about making sure everybody keeps the ink clean, and they give you a brand new pen, so you're not introducing any outside, problems. So I think they were just kind of, it's like you can go there and swatch a bunch of inks, some of which they don't even have for sale.
Yeah, that's probably true. There were a few things I found interesting. One was that, so there's this store Kawasaki Bungoten that we have talked about a few times. I believe they always do very quirky, interesting pens and inks. They had some either like event exclusives or something they sold at the first time at this event. Some inks that were very clearly made by Platinum, like in the sense that they used Platinum's ink bottles, this like the same bottles as Platinum's mixable inks and
rhombus
shapes.
I looked it up. Yeah,
that's what I was looking for. I couldn't find a word. Yeah, rhombus. And they even had some iron gold ones, and we know that Platinum is selling two kinds of mixable inks, just the regular dye-based mixable inks, and they also have iron gold mixable inks. So I'm not sure if this was the Kawasaki guy mixing his own Platinum inks and just selling those, or if this was Platinum's first foray into like store exclusive inks.
Yeah, they do have like that ink baron guy, right? That they kind of bring in sometimes. And it didn't specifically say it on the boxes, but typically a lot of their special inks with all the different little, I call it Easter grass, little grassy things that they put inside their boxes to make it look like it's an Easter egg in there or whatever. And typically the ink baron, I think, makes them. So yeah, you're right. I'm not sure if it was just standard like Platinum made ink or he actually had something to do with it.
And then Sailor had two event exclusive inks, but I'm not sure if you bought them. I thought that they looked a bit too boring. It was like Kononuma and Anonuma or something like that.
Yeah, it was just the wordplay. I bought one just because it just cracked me up, the Kononuma, Numa. So yeah, but they were in the typical Sailor square bottle, and it was kind of not as interesting as the other options.
Yeah, so I think overall it was a well-run event, and again, I think it was a good value, and people seemed to have a lot of fun. And I remember Alesa, watching your video, there was some people there had brought their own ink testing notebooks. There was one that was particularly interesting with these three stripes of paper from different paper types, right?
Right.
What was it? It was like Graphilo. What was it?
It was Graphilo, Takasago Premium, and Tomoe River. She had the exact same top 3 papers that I like. I thought it was funny because she really just gave me a long lecture about why these were the best papers. And I'm like, you're preaching to the choir, but she insisted that I understood that.
Something that you said earlier, which caught my attention, is that there were a lot of, let's say, overseas inks that usually aren't available in a lot of retailers.
Right.
So you mentioned like Aurora is not commonly found in retailers. Probably Caran d'Ache is not commonly found in retailers. Do you think there's a bit of that kind of, I suppose, attraction because they're not easily available? Similar to how a lot of times I think in the West, people in like the US or the UK or the rest of Europe really covet sailor inks, for example, because they're just not commonly found and there's no other way to get them.
Absolutely. I think there were the like Caran d'Ache and Ackerman and the Aurora inks, and even things like Troublemaker. I don't think Troublemaker was there, but Vinta inks were there. Those are not commonly available in the average stationery store.
But some of the inks available are also inks that you can buy on any given day at either Itoya or Morrison. But the thing is, you can't just go to the 3rd floor of Itoya and bring your own dip pen and notebook and start swatching all the inks, right?
Yeah.
That's true. I guess this is an opportunity to find out what they really want.
The lady that had the 3 different kinds of paper, she didn't buy a lot. I think she kind of like tried everything and then like carefully considered one bottle. And many people, you could leave and come back, right? And there were people that would test a bunch of inks and then leave. They have a coffee shop there just for a bit and think about their purchase and come back in. I thought that was a much more measured crowd than you normally see at Inkanuma. Lots of times at Inkanuma, people are dragging along suitcases, right? And they're just buying gobs of ink for their friends and plopping them in the drag-along suitcase. So it had a little bit more of a, for lack of a better word, refined air to it. Like it was more like people were there testing instead of just, like I do, it's just willy-nilly buy stuff.
But do you think it's also because they had a lot of inventory there, so there wasn't really a fear of, I guess, selling out?
Well, there were just a gajillion special editions. I mean, I just finally gave up. There was just too many. I mean, Sailor had them and different lines had them. And there was just, every time I turned around, like Romeo had a bunch of special editions, the Romeo inks. And there were probably like 20 different special editions. So I think, people going, you need to go right away to get the limited edition. It's like, which limited edition? And there was enough limited editions of the different kind that somebody could get one. A limited edition.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think, it wasn't this big rush that you normally see.
Right. And for the listeners who don't know, Romeo is the in-house brand of Itoya.
Yeah.
So one of the inks that I heard were really popular was this green limited edition Romeo ink, actually. Did any of you try that or buy that?
Yeah, so I bought that and I tried it. I thought it was pretty like standard green ink. I didn't. I mean, it was nice, but it wasn't anything particular. I mean, it wasn't. I usually find tag inks interesting because they always find this interesting like in between colors and shades and so on. This Itoya ink wasn't anything like that. It was just like a plain like mid green ink. I thought. You saw people buying it. But it wasn't really anything that special.
So why did you buy it?
Because someone asked me to buy it.
Yeah. And that was probably the one ink, that Romeo green one, that most people were interested in. I'm not sure why, because I saw it and I'm like, yeah, it's green. And and the Romeo bottles, they're rather uninspiring. So I didn't get it.
Yeah. All right. But overall, you'd say it's a good event?
Absolutely. I think mainly because it is so different. It's such an unusual thing, and I think it just captures people's imagination that you can try of, swatching 100 different bottles. I mean, 1,000 different bottles of ink, or over 1,000. I think you were saying like 1,500.
Yeah.
Jacob?
Yeah.
Yeah. So somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 bottles of ink, you could swatch them and walk out, not buy a single bottle. You just paid your entrance fee and you got a little dip pen and you got to try them, and you were there for 2.5 hours. Now, I know it was really crowded for you, Jacob, but you went on the weekend.
Yeah.
It wasn't that bad during the weekday. So I had plenty of room to like take video and stuff. So it was probably a lot less crowded during the weekday, but it's definitely something different and just something so unique. It's just different than just, we want to sell you something. It was kind of like, we want you to experience something.
Yeah.
And then while you're here, buy some stuff.
Yeah, that's very true.
Kind of off the back of that, do you think that they made enough on their investment to have this again next year?
I don't know. This is only their second one. So
right.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, hopefully this will continue, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Like there's another ink show coming up, right? And in the end of August, and I'm like, another ink show, because it's like all the other ones, right? But then this ink, if they have one again next year, I definitely want to go to it. As opposed to now, when we get an ink show that's a normal ink show, I'm like, do I really want to go? Because I don't want to fight the crowds and look through 10,000 tons of washi tape. Do I want to do that to like look at some inks? Where here, you're going to go and it is only inks. And it almost has a curated feel to it. So, yeah, I would definitely go to this one again, more so than like a normal ink show.
And what is the one at the end of August?
The Bunga Joshi people have another one coming out at the end of August.
Okay.
But now they even admit that there's going to be like washi tape and stuff. They just don't call it an ink show anymore. It's like an ink show and something else.
So it's kind of like last year's Ink and Deco Numa.
Yes, exactly. I think it's even called Ink and Deco too. I'm not sure.
Okay. So
that's the one where people were basically like rushing toward, the tables and the bookshelves where all the exclusive inks were, and they were just fighting over.
Yeah, you get tackled if you get in the way.
Right. Yeah. All right. Sounds like you guys had a good time. I didn't go this year just because I didn't want to be tempted by all that ink. But hey, sounds like y'all had a good time.
We did. I did.
All right. Moving on to the next topic, a little bit out of order here, but Jacob, you and I both received these glass pens. So we talked last time about Wancher's Kunisaki glass pens, and with a little bit of research and digging, it appeared that they were very, very similar to those made by the Oita Penitentiary kind of Capic program, right?
Yeah.
So you went ahead and ordered 2 from the Furusato Noze.
Yeah.
And I ordered 1 directly from Wancher.
Yeah.
And you made a post about it. You made an Instagram post about it. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I managed to order 2 of those Capic pens in a roundabout way. And they arrived, and they were, I must say, I was surprised by just how nice these pens were. So there seems to be 2, if you look at Capic's website, or rather the social media platforms, you can see that there are 2 main models. There's one where the glass nib is pretty large, like 3 centimeters long, and then the body has this twisted, wavy pattern, right? And then there's another model where the nib is smaller, and then it is kind of sphere thing between the nib and the body, and that wave shape only goes halfway. So both of the pens that I got were of the former model where the nib is pretty long and the whole body has that wave shape. It seems like it's such a well-made pen. I mean, the nib holds a lot of ink. I dipped it once and I could easily write a whole page without any problems. And it wasn't like, sometimes badly designed glass nibs have this problem where, you start right and it just drips ink, and then it quickly goes to thin, faint, dry line, and then that's the end of it, right? It's like the drill log experience, right? This one has none of that. You dip it and it has very sort of controlled ink flow, and you can write for a long time. So, and and the feedback is just that, you know, pencil like it. You can feel the paper, but it doesn't, you know, scratch. It doesn't tear up the paper. So overall, the pen is so well designed. It makes me really want to know the story behind it. Is this some kind of like grand glass master who was convicted for tax fraud or something? Like, what's the story here? I don't get it.
No, it certainly looks really well, and of course, you are fantastic at the, you know, photography of these products. I mean, when you receive these pens, what was the expectation, and what did you actually receive?
Well, I only saw the photos on Capic's website, which, as we talked about in the last episode, were remarkably similar to Wancher's website. So if you go to Wancher's online store right now, they only have the second model I talked about, where the nib is smaller. But if you go to Wancher's Pinterest account, maybe also on the Facebook or whatever, but on the Pinterest account in particular, they have all of photos of their current and past models, and that's where you can clearly see these two different models, and it's basically the same two models that this Capic program also sells. So we are talking about not just one but two different glass pen designs that are sold both by this Capic program and sold by Wancher, which is very suspicious. I don't have myself one of the Wancher pens with this, you know, older design that I'm talking about, but one of our friends, a listener of the podcast, has one of the older Wancher pens with the very same design. And as far as I can tell, it's very similar.
Yeah, so I actually asked this friend of ours to help us give some measurements, and the measurements, the total length 18 centimeters, body length 15, nib length 13, all of these seem, you know, suspiciously very, very similar to what you received.
I mean,
okay, so do you guys want me to just say it, since you're just tiptoeing around it? I just think that basically it's the same thing. They don't want to fess up, but it's the same thing.
Yeah.
But what I'm curious about, you said it's a very good writer. It's a good pen.
Yeah.
Well, that's a nice thing, you know. I mean, but yeah, I think you guys have pretty much well shown that it probably is a prison pen.
So I actually purchased the other model, the second model that you're talking about, and I did notice that the nib was slightly shorter than the first model. But it comes with this pen pillow, which I don't think yours came with, right?
No, it didn't.
And I think last time we referenced a Reddit user, You Sincerely Spicy, who had also ordered from Wancher. And one of the things that I noticed was that when You Sincerely Spicy had bought their pen, it came in the older Capex box, the kind of teal sky blue box, whereas Wancher has now actually updated the box, and so now they're repackaging, or seemingly to be repackaging, these pens into their own wooden boxes.
Yeah.
And I did think that, you know, that was probably a smart kind of marketing choice on Wancher's side. But yeah, Alesa, I do agree with you. It seems all but confirmed. It seems all but confirmed that they're pretty much, you know, from the same place. Which leads us to wonder why exactly Wancher would, you know, go out of their way to kind of create this backstory about these glass masters in Kunizaki who, you know, as Jacob said, maybe they were indicted for tax fraud and, you know, hold up somewhere now.
It would be interesting to know. It would be interesting to know the story behind the people who actually make these pens. So, but whatever it is, the pens themselves are actually quite nice. At least the ones I got. I was pleasantly surprised by not only how like beautiful they were, but also how well they wrote. However strange the backstory is, these are good glass pens.
And how much did you pay for yours?
Well, so I got mine via this hometown tax program, so I ended up paying 2,000 yen in total.
Whereas I paid 20,000 yen.
Yeah. So.
All right. So that's kind of the follow-up to these Wancher Kunisaki pens. Next up, unpopular opinions about fountain pens and ink. So what are these unpopular opinions we're talking about?
Yeah, really.
How unpopular?
A few days ago, YouTube's algorithm recommended me an old video by Goulet Pens, where a customer, I guess, of Goulet Pens asked Brian Goulet, does he have any kind of unpopular opinions about pens or ink and paper? So any opinions that probably aren't the same as most of the community. And I think his answers were that he likes cartridge converter pens, and he's using all of his pens. No pens are just collectors only pens. They're all being used. I can't remember what his other opinions were, but my thought when I saw that video is that would be kind of fun topic for this podcast, especially now that we have Alesa on this episode. So between the three of us, I'm sure we have some opinions that might be unusual, uncommon. So that's the idea behind this segment.
All right. Well, I've got one.
I'm sure you do.
Which is, I don't think that it's healthy for the community to always be chasing the best deal or the biggest discounts.
Yeah, I agree.
Because discounts are great for the consumer, but at the end of the day, in order for the industry to survive and to keep going, you need to have money in it. It needs to be profitable for people who are actually doing these things. So, and we'll get to this later as well, in the main topic, so to say. But sometimes people ask me to help them get a pen, and I'll say it's X the price, right? And they'll be like, oh, but it's so expensive. What they don't understand is there's like buying train tickets to get there. There's like time lost, and so at the end of the day, maybe I make like $20 or like $30 out of it. And for these manufacturers, right? Jacob, you sent me a link to Sailor's website when they were looking for apprentice nib grinders, and those people don't get paid a lot at all. And so I think, and that was a time when Sailor was actually losing money, right? So I think it's, of course, I don't know how Sailor is using their newfound profits. I hope it goes to paying their employees. But at the end of the day, I think if you're looking for a discount on something, if you're trying to just get the biggest discount, somebody is paying for it. It might not be you, the consumer, but that cost is bore by somebody down the line. And I don't think fountain pens made anybody a millionaire, right? I'm just going to put it out there. I don't think anybody became a millionaire by selling fountain pens, at least not in our modern era. So, yeah, that's my unpopular opinion.
As someone who's always looking for the best possible deal, usually secondhand, I'm personally offended by this opinion. But so is your opinion then that you should buy pens at MSRP? Should you avoid it? I mean, there are certain retailers that are famous for, not just the occasional discounts, but have a consistent discount and sometimes suspiciously low prices.
Right. So, to your point about buying secondhand pens, those pens would only be available to you at that cost if somebody had bought it first, right? At MSRP. Like, you wouldn't be able to get those savings if somebody hadn't helped, I guess, front the costs, so to say. And then the pens that you usually buy are like, 30, 40, 50 years old. Like, really beat down pens. And that's why they're at that price. Of course, you could get them to look almost like new again, but that takes a lot of polishing and stuff like that. So I think for new pens, for new pens, it's, I think MSRP, sometimes it's expensive. Like Monte Grappas, I think they're wildly expensive. Graf von Faber-Castell, they're wildly expensive. But I also don't have to buy them, It's not an imperative that I own them. And that's fine. But I think when, we try to look for the biggest discount, then what happens is all of the retailers then have to gravitate to that same level of discount. So let's say one certain retailer, let's say retailer A always discounts by, I don't know, 40%.
Yeah.
Then the other retailers will also have to discount in order to be competitive. And what that means, and here's the thing, right? The retailers usually, they make like 40 or 50% margin. And then if they discount it by like 30% or 40%, that means their margin decreases, right? And that means the cost that they have to pay overhead, to pay rent, to pay wages, that all goes down. So, we always talk about, supporting our local brick and mortar stores. We're always sad when a fountain pen store closes down. Well, a lot of times they close down because there's these expectations that, well, you have to have free delivery, right? You have to have next day delivery, or you have to have these discounts. And ultimately, that kind of race to the bottom just becomes unsustainable for a lot of shops, especially the smaller ones.
Are you saying that as a consumer, you have a moral obligation to buy from the stores that sell at MSRP and avoid the discount retailers? Or who needs to make sure that people don't buy at discounts?
Well, I don't think there's a moral obligation for the consumer to do anything, right? The consumer, they have to look out for themselves and what is their best interest, right? If you can't afford to buy a pen, my recommendation is always don't buy it. But I think it's less of a individual obligation and more of this Amazon culture that we live in, where we're almost so spoiled in the way that we expect free delivery or free shipping, next day delivery, and that kind of expectation has I think skewed a little bit of the consumer's perspective. So I think just in general, it would be productive for consumers to think, obviously if there's free shipping, that's great, that's something that's provided by the retailer, and that's just what it is, that's fine. But when a shop or a retailer doesn't provide free shipping, right, like we can always think, okay, is it reasonable for them to ask for this shipping? Is it reasonable that I'm asking for free shipping on like a $50 purchase when shipping costs $40? I think there's a lot of food for thought in that.
But I think actually people do address this to some extent, because I've just seen multiple discussions online where people talk about, I think it was specifically about companies that put a lot of information out on the internet. They take the time to film and put out product information or just general information about fountain pens for people that don't know a lot about it. And so they kind of add to the community, and some people feel a certain amount of loyalty. And I think I've seen that a lot, where it seems to be the consensus. It just depends on what your cutoff is. But some people will say, like, if I can save up to 30% off, I'll still go with this retailer and pay their full price. But if I can save more than 30%, I'm going to go with a discount. So they're kind of making a compromise between recognizing that these companies, A, have to, keep their business running, and B, they add a lot to the community. And still, like, they've got a budget too. So, I don't know if it's 10% or 20%, but this particular person was very clear about on one of these discussions that it was flat out 30% for him. If he up to 30%, he would just pay the full up price at whatever whatever company he was kind of loyal to. But if he could save more than 30%, he had to think about the fact that, he's got a budget. So then he would go with a discount. So I think a lot of people do think about this. I think there's a certain amount of I don't want to say morality, but because that's just too loaded, but there's a certain amount of understanding, that's a better word, understanding at a level that we are a niche hobby, and our niche hobby is run by small businesses. And so they do want to make sure that these businesses are here, but also, they got to pay their rent or whatever. So I think it is addressed by a lot of people, that they do feel a certain way of both wanting to save money and helping the community.
But I think the main way this is addressed nowadays is with store exclusives, right? If I just want to buy a standard Pilot 74, I mean, if I want to, test it out, then I may want to go to Maruzen or whichever my local retailer is. But if I know what I want, I might as well buy it from Amazon. But if I want to buy, Hachimonja's Ginsan Snow, well, I can only buy it from Hachimonja. And I think for the last few years, we have seen an explosion of store exclusive. And I think that's the way going forward.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good way to address that.
I agree as well. And I think that's definitely how the market should go. And I think actually Goulet Pens is a good example of what Alesa, you were talking about, because they're the ones that put out a lot of new content that most newcomers to fountain pens actually probably have watched one or two of their videos, which they do all, quote unquote, for free. And I think they are a little bit more expensive than like a Pen Chalet, for example, right? But Pen Chalet doesn't necessarily put out content on how to clean your pens or how to take care of your pens. And so I think there is a lot of value in that. And even this podcast, for example, right? Like this podcast, we put out a lot of information, and it's free. It's free, and hopefully will continue to be free in perpetuity. But there's a lot of information out there that enthusiasts like us put together, and we don't necessarily get paid for that. And so if there's a retailer that's going out there doing that's time that they don't get to do the selling, right? That's time where they don't get to do the making money part of the business. And so I think store exclusives, information, but also customer service, right? I think customer service has an important factor to do with this, because in Japan most stores are pretty good at it. But if you buy something, it doesn't ship for 4 weeks, and then you try to contact them, nobody is there to pick up the phone, unless it's like like a 70% off or something, like a significant discount. You're probably not going to buy there again.
That's true.
So that was my unpopular opinion, which took 20 minutes to discuss. What about you guys? You have any unpopular opinions?
It should be like your in every podcast we'll have a popular opinion of the day.
When you watch or read pen reviews, when the reviewer likes the nib, a common adjective is smooth. We seem to use smooth as almost like synonymous with a good nib, a well-behaved nib, a nib you want to write with, right? And I think sometimes you hear the same thing with paper, like Rhodia paper is good because it's smooth and the nib just glides over it. And I think overall in the pen community we seem to consider smooth to be good. Like smooth nib is good, smooth paper is good. My unpopular opinion is that I object to that. I think
you guys are really into this. I object to this.
Well, so because a nib that is too smooth, not only are you going to have probably baby's bottoms and hard start, but even ignoring that, the two problems I have is that first of all, if you don't feel like the paper when you write, you might as well just write with a stylus on a glass surface. You don't have the tactile feeling of writing. It's not a pleasant writing experience to me. And the other thing is my handwriting looks even worse when I'm using an overly smooth nib, because when the nib glides too much on the paper, I find it harder to shape the handwritten characters. It looks even worse than it normally does. I tend to prefer nibs that have a bit of a pencil feedback. I don't want to tear up the page when I'm writing. I don't want different feedback depending on direction, but I want this consistent pencil-like feedback on my nibs. And the same one with paper. I prefer textured paper, especially like Midori MD. I think it's way nicer to write on than say Rhodia, precisely because it has that texture, has that little bit of a tooth that feels like you're writing with paper rather than using a stylus on a glass surface. So that's mine.
I also find that seems to be more common among reviewers who target like newer audiences.
Absolutely.
I think,
yeah. I was going to agree with that.
People who have experience with fountain pens usually don't actually prefer that glassy, smooth feeling.
I think what it is when you come from a ballpoint pen and then you go to a fountain pen, that's probably the first noticeable thing you have, is that it's, wow, it just like ink comes out and it's so smooth, and it's a very distinct difference. And so I think new fountain pen users really revel in that. And then after a while, you start to notice things like, my handwriting's not as good, or I want a little bit of feedback to know where I'm at when I'm writing. So I think, and again, this will probably be super unpopular, is that I think as you become a more experienced fountain pen user, you tend not necessarily not like smooth nibs, but you branch out in your tastes.
Yeah.
And you start to like different kinds. And that's probably one of the reasons, my biggest problem with Chinese nibs is they're just incredibly smooth. And I feel like I'm not really writing. I'm not sure what I'm doing. It just feels, so whenever I get a Chinese nib, I always just drag it across a knife sharpener a little bit just to rough it up a little bit. So that's my unpopular opinion.
Oh, that's very creative. I like it. Maybe there should be a recurring segment on a podcast. I feel like we could go on forever, but we have other topics.
Exactly.
So, CY, do you want to move on to Naginata Togi news?
Yeah, so I saw on a story the other day, which I sent to you, I believe, and it seems that Sailor are stopping all new orders of Naginata Togi nibs for the time being. They're pausing the production of Naginata nibs, and we've actually seen this before, right? We saw this back around 2015, 2016.
Right.
At the time, they were saying that demand was outstripping supply, and basically people were buying these nibs faster than they could produce them. So it seems like something similar is happening yet again. And last time when they did this, they came out with the new series, which is the special nib series, where they created a new body, new section, which looked exactly like the old pens. They were just threaded differently. But it also accompanied a 30,000 yen jump. This time we know that from August 1 they're going to increase the price of the Naginata Togis to the standard Naginata Togi to 80,000 yen. So that's a 30% 30% increase, which makes, I think, Naginata Togis very unappealing in terms of the price point. Now, of course, that comes off the back of me saying that, hey, you shouldn't be looking for the biggest discounts. But I think also that these Naginata Togi nibs, they're going to be priced out of a lot of people's range now. And I think there's going to be a stronger demand for I think aftermarket grinds, especially when you consider that you can bring one to Nagahara and get it for, what is it, $120 you can get a Naginata Togi from him. And I think, we'll probably be seeing that a lot more often.
So I only had a quick look at the announcements. I didn't understand the full scope. So we're saying that this is not just about, the build to order, build the gear, but it's actually the quote unquote standard bespoke line, the Naginata, the cross point, and all of those.
So I'm gonna send you the link to the press release, but they did submit a press release onto their website saying that they're going to stop the ordering of Naginata Togi and the special pen grinds for the time being.
So this comes after, as you said, it comes after that recent announcement that they are increasing their prices. This is really curious, especially as you say, because now there are more like nib workers than ever offering Naginata-ish grinds, right? So you would naively think that there's more competition could potentially drive prices down, but clearly that's not happening. There's a lot of demand for these nibs.
They say that they've got orders for the next 6 months, so that they can't really take more new orders, which I think could be very interesting. Could be a positive thing.
But I wonder though if this means any kind of personal some turnover changes at Sailor. I mean, you just a few minutes ago we talked about how Sailor doesn't pay their nib workers particularly well, and it might be more lucrative to do this, go solo and do your own nib work. So maybe they're struggling to retain their nib workers with the talent needed to produce these kind of nibs.
That could be possible, but I don't see a lot of these nib workers at least advertising their services.
That's true.
Outside of Nagara-san. So yeah, I mean, I hope that this actually pushes the market in a more customized grind kind of direction, just like everywhere else in the world. But we'll see.
Yeah.
All right, now to the main topic of the day. You two fine folks here had collaborated on a, I think, project about how to buy pens from Japan. And yeah, I'm curious how this kind of collaboration came about. Where was the idea? And obviously we get these questions all the time. So yeah, just take us away.
Yeah, so I think it was my idea, but it was inspired by Alesa. It was inspired by what Alesa said in the spicy episode, if you remember, right? So she said
the spicy episode.
So she said that we are privileged in the sense that we live here in Japan. We have easy access to most of the pens that we're talking about, including some, obscure store exclusives. They're all relatively easy for us to buy. And for that reason, we don't necessarily, appreciate, understand, the challenges people have acquiring these pens from overseas and, the value that these resellers provide. So then I thought, okay, why don't we create a guide? Why don't we figure out how to buy pens from Japan if you're not here? What stores can sell pens and ship overseas? What pen clubs are willing to sell directly to people overseas? What kind of proxy shipping forwarding services are available? And once you have an account with one of those services, what are the online stores you can use to buy from, and also what are the second-hand options? So I did a bit of research and I created like a big page full of links, and then Alesa took that and made this fantastic video when she explained in detail about how to use some of the stores, some of the shipping services, the difference between them, and I think that became quite popular. We got a lot of feedback on those.
I just want to mention that Jacob left the, he put it together. This is his information, but he kind of left the testing to me, and it was just awful. It was just awful. Going through those secondhand like websites and just pages and pages of stuff. And I just realized why, Jacob wears a fishing hat and tells people to get off his lawn, because he sits there and looks at these pages. It was just, I don't know how you do it, Jacob.
Yeah, Yahoo Auctions and Mercari in particular, it takes a while to get used to, the interface.
Oh, I died. Yeah. Oh, God. It was awful.
Yeah, and this is a very comprehensive list.
It took me some time to put the list together too, because I wasn't really that into fountain pens before I moved to Japan. So I have never been in a position where I was anywhere else and tried to buy pens from Japan. So I didn't really know what the difference was between, White Rabbit and Bai and Zen Market and Tenso and Black Ship and whatever they're called. So I had to do some research, and Alesa did that, to be honest, most of the research and testing about that. And then I tried to find a list of all the various online stores, and part of that included just going to Rakuten and search for, Gente Manes and see what kind of stores were selling, and then, listing all of the stores and then putting direct links to, the fountain pens section, the exclusive pens sections, and sometimes exclusive direct links to the actual pens. And the biggest challenge, or one of the challenges, was to avoid just pressing the buy button yourself while you're putting together that link.
Yeah, absolutely. At one time, I was just adding and trying to figure out, will this go to the, outside of Japan? Will this not? And I was just running through and going, okay, and I just had an address, a home address in the States. And I was just running through and doing that. And then I realized I had like $3,000 worth of pens in there. And I almost hit the buy button. And I just had I got to like make sure I take each pen out. So if I accidentally buy something, I'm not buying like gobs of stuff. I'm just buying one thing. But yeah, that was a danger.
One question I got a few times, and I think, Alesa, you got a question too, was, why didn't you include Pensacci in the list? And my response to that was that my goal was to explain how to buy directly from the original seller, whether that is a retailer like Ishimari Bunkudo, or whether it was a pen club like YY Pen Club. And I think people don't realize that Pensacci is a reseller. We covered that before. And also I think they didn't realize what kind of markup. I think most people realize that there is a markup that you pay when you buy from a reseller. I don't think they necessarily realize how big that markup can be. So I not on the post, but I did some Instagram stories afterwards with some examples, and I found at least one case where you're paying more than twice the price, more than twice the retail price when you buy from one of the resellers. And I'm not talking about including the shipping fees or anything like that. I'm talking about just the price of the pen itself, comparing the actual retail price to the reseller's advertised price.
I think that's the Pilot 91 Hamanasu,
yeah,
right? That you talked about. I'm curious because for those of the listeners who might not know, sometimes folks also ask you and I think you have one particular person, but for me, a lot of different people ask me to help them acquire certain exclusive and hard to get Japanese limited editions.
Yeah.
I'm curious to understand your thoughts on why sometimes some people would want to use let's say like a proxy or a reseller, or when some people would maybe want to buy direct.
I think people don't realize that some stores do sell directly. For example, I think we have talked about it previously on the podcast. Nagasawa is one of those stores that sell directly to people overseas, but it is not immediately obvious when you go to the website or even when you go to the Instagram account. Like if you don't know, you might think that you can only buy these Nagasawa exclusive decimals or whatever it is you're looking for if you are in Japan. So for that reason, you might be tempted to go to one of the resellers that is advertising this pen, even though you're paying like 50+% markup. So and even I didn't really know which retailers sold overseas. So I wanted to do that research. I wanted to figure it out for myself, and I got some help from various other people who had done similar research. So I think, to answer your question, people don't buy directly because they don't know they can buy directly.
And do you think there are differences, and I've written down this on the show notes, there is surely a difference between scalpers versus resellers versus retailers, right?
Yeah.
So we know that some people purchase in large amounts, not really just to resell the product, but also to make sure nobody else gets to resell the product so they can, get a monopoly on said limited edition and raise the prices, right?
It's not black and white. I mean, it can be hard to say who is a scalper, who is a reseller. I would say if you are, you buy 3 pens from Hachimonja and you sell them on eBay, there's no question that you are a reseller. And if you want to buy from that eBay
Right.
seller, then you don't have to buy from that eBay seller. If you, on the other hand, buy the full stock of, every single pen that is in stock from, again, using Hachimonja as an example, and you put them on your website, and on top of that, you don't make it obvious that you make it look like you are a legitimate retailer. That's when I have a problem. So A, you make it hard for people to buy directly, and B, you pretend to be a normal retailer.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I did have a curiosity. So Izumi Pens, he's kind of like straddling between reseller and retailer, and a lot of people ask me about Izumi Pen or Izumi Pens. I don't remember exactly the handle, but what he does is he goes around to different retailers in Japan and he asks them, hey, can I create limited editions in your name? Because he doesn't hold a direct relationship with Sailor, right? So he says, can I order limited editions through you guys? And so he's had collaborations, I think, mostly with Pen Point, but also with some other shops where he's created various hits. I would say he's like the male version of Shishikura-san, right? Where he's really been successful in designing a lot of really cool and really well coveted pens. And I had an experience once where he was selling this kind of pearlescent green Realo, and I bought a few from him and I changed them into kind of these flex nibs, and I got a lot of inquiries from that story. And I remember one particular customer, she asked, how much are these? I said, well, it's going to be cheaper if you buy directly from Izumi, because he's the one who's selling it to me. And this customer said, well, I want to specifically buy it from you because it has your nib work on it. So I think there are cases where going through resellers probably does yield some kind of a benefit. And I'm thinking specifically about like if you're buying a hard to get edition and you use something like a Zen Market, for example. Zen Market people aren't necessarily knowledgeable about pens, so they wouldn't know where to check, right? Whereas somebody who you trust on the ground, who is like an actual person, a lot of times they'll be able to help you make sure that the pen is functioning, that doesn't require repairs and stuff like that. So I do see some kind of value in using retailers sometimes, but I agree with you that there are certain resellers who then change the name of the editions, right? Who aren't forthright with where exactly they're getting these pens. And I agree with you that that's where the problems really start. Whereas if you again look at Izumi Pens, I think Izumi Pens is always very clear, this is a Bunga Box edition or this is a stationary station edition.
Well, not only that, but it's sometimes selling pens that you really would have a really hard time, even if you're in Japan, to buy elsewhere. So, for example, I remember recently he managed to get hold of some Maruzen show exclusive pens from like 10 years ago, and I don't even know what he charges for that. But I mean that's not something you can easily get hold of, even if you're here, even if you can go to Maruzen, or even if you have access to auctions. That is a very hard to find pen, and I think it's reasonable to have a markup on that. But if you don't provide any value add, which to be honest I think most resellers don't really do, and on top of that you buy up the entire stock so that you make it hard for people to buy it through the normal channels, well, then you're not really a value add to the community.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. Alesa, anything else to add?
Yeah, I just think that the thing that really shows that special editions that's the way of the future. I think we talked about, supporting the small business, but also that's like 90% of the reason why people want to get pens from Japan is that they already know what a straight up, 911 is or whatever. But they want something that's different. And I think the different colors, the different nibs, the different finials, those are all fun. It makes the pen more personal. And I think Western markets and producers should really pay attention to that. That's really, I think, the way the market's going to go. and I think it will help grow the fountain pen community if we can capitalize on that.
But also a lot of times that's because, let's just say Sailor, right? Sailor won't let them make those editions.
And that's where, like, maybe other pen companies, Western pen companies, they have a standard model, offer it in like an interesting nib that's just not the regular, Yoba number 6. It actually has an imprint that's different or whatever. But I mean, I don't know what the answer is, but that definitely would catch people's attention.
Yeah. All right, shall we close out with some listener questions?
Do we have that? Sure.
All right. So I've got 2 questions today. The first question, why is the universe of brush fountain pens so completely distinct from that of metal nib fountain pens? It's true that brush nibs wear out, but they can be replaced on most pens. There are some beautiful brush fountain pens, as you know, and they can do amazing things with the same inks that we obsess over for their use in solid nibs. I use brush pens for ink drawing and washes in combination with my metal nib pens. So, what do you think?
Maybe a circular answer, but it's just a different community. I when I think of brush pens, I think of either like traditional Asian calligraphy, or I think of brush lettering, which I think is slightly different community, different group of people than your normal fountain pen users. The same way, like dip pen calligraphy is also a different community. There's some overlap, of course, but it's just not the same group of people. I think those who are buying fountain pens, you might think that they're all interested in calligraphy, but I think a relatively small part of that community is buying fountain pens to write Spencerian.
Yeah. And I also think that it's just a fundamentally different product. With a brush pen, you have to consistently change out the brush, and making the brushes are hard. I think the only people that are making brush fountain pens that I can think of are really Kuretake, who does a good job on that. But even those, because the entire section has to be disposable, I think you don't get as high of a quality on the non-brush parts of that pen.
True.
All right, the second question. Why does Sailor still use 21K gold in their large and KOP nibs? I noticed that even though theoretically 21K gold should be softer than 14 or 18K gold, my 21K Sailor nib isn't any noticeably bouncier or softer than my 14K gold nibs, mostly from Pilot, Platinum, and Sailor. If gold prices are rising, causing Sailor's recent price hikes, and using 21K gold in their nibs doesn't have much of a tangible difference in writing experience compared to the 14K nibs, why doesn't Sailor switch to using 14K or 18K alloys in their large and KOP nibs?
Didn't we ask the same question just a few episodes ago?
I think there's a matter of pride. I think they have a lot of pride in providing the market's only 21K nib. And I want to point out that the carat is not necessarily what makes a material soft or not. I think more often than not it has to do with the alloys. And so that's why you find that Pilot nibs, for example, are significantly softer than, let's say, Platinum nibs. So I think, the purpose of having a 21K gold nib is not to make it bouncier or softer. It's just a matter of pride. It's just a matter of, in a way, ego, right? And we did see that in their 21K series that they released last year with the full size and the KOP pen. I think that was just called 21K Blue Dawn. But yeah, I don't think there's a particular reason for that.
Absolutely, it's marketing. It's and like you said, the gold. It's not just the alloy. It's whether or not it's been work hardened. It matters on the shape of the nib. You can use a gold nib, and some of them are like harder than a steel nib. But if you think about it this way, you can wear a stainless steel necklace or you can wear a 21 karat gold necklace. They're both necklaces. They both look nice, but one's 21 karat gold. It's just the marketing. It's a more luxe item. And when you have a bigger nib and a KOP, it's a more luxe pen. And that's what they're using it for.
For the KOP, because it's kind of a high-end niche product, I wouldn't be surprised if they keep the 21K. For the large, for the Pro Gear size, I think it's conceivable that they might reintroduce the large 14K, because as we have talked about before, many times Sailor did large 14K nibs for a long time, and we have had countless large 14K nibs, right? And they are quite soft, they're quite good, and I don't see why they wouldn't be able to produce those again.
I think a caveat to that is that they have to see sales dip from their price increase using 21 karat gold nibs.
Yeah.
And I think with that, we have an episode. Thank you very, very much. If you liked this episode, please give us a review. Please rate us on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you are listening to this. And yeah, we'll see you next time. My name is CY. You can find me on my website at tokyostationpens.com, on Instagram and TikTok at Tokyo Station Pens, and on Twitter at Tokyo Station MNH.
And my name is Jacob, and I'm FoodFan on Instagram and on Twitter, and have a blog at foodfan.com.
Thanks for having me on. This is Alesa. I'm Inky Rocks on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.